Good morning. I'm Professor Jason Leggett. I teach in the Criminal Justice Program here at Kingsborough, and I was asked after receiving section level data about equity outcomes, what does that data mean to me and how have I used it to inform my practice as it relates to student outcomes. So I tend to take a big picture view first. So I want to place this data within a larger context, which is the social system that we live in New York City, and to accept the reality that the social system produces inequitable outcomes. As a legal scholar, I have to do research on the formation of the country, the founding document, and one founder, James Madison, very succinctly wrote about the intent of the Constitution to maintain unequal distribution of property in the Federalist Papers. And so just kind of wrapping around that critical legal studies framework helps me understand that we shouldn't be surprised to see inequitable outcomes in our classrooms, and to try to limit the picture to what we can manage, and to, of course, be aware of these larger social structures, but to also understand that our impact on those structures are going to be fairly limited. So I try to be aware of colonial narratives. I try to bring out in the classroom the concepts of the protection of property interests being in contradiction or in competition with those of human rights, and to understand that this system promotes competition over cooperation, and to understand that these processes are historical and structural, and to try to bring this out into the class experience. At the Meso-Level, I try to think about the CUNY system and the institutional norms that we are all debating or we're discussing or trying to wrap our heads around. And so having a clear understanding of what the college believes diversity, inclusion, and equity should be is helpful when trying to analyze data that is dealing with these outcomes. But also to understand that it's a segregated system. People have different opinions about not just what these words mean, but how these concepts should play out in their day-to-day lives. And so that's going to reinforce competing narratives about the data and about the change as it relates to that data. In addition, I like to make sure I understand my environment that I'm working in, and so there's a hierarchy within CUNY, and Kingsborough is a hierarchy within that hierarchy. And that's going to be in tension with bottom-up approaches necessarily. And so just to keep that in mind, that people are going to have different interpretations of not only what the data means, but what should be done about it. And that this is reproducing silos of action and or inaction. And there's not usually going to be feedback or communication across these roles. So instead of being frustrated with that, I need to accept that reality and try to figure out what I can do in the classroom to try to bridge these gaps. And I think one thing that it's difficult to do at the institutional level is to consider the life path of students who are affected differently by different classes. They may do well in one class and struggle in another, and that they might have a bad experience in one class and then have a better experience in another as well. And that's hard to capture through the data alone. So when I get down to the micro level, I've got a good understanding of the macro and the mezzo, and I'm now thinking about my classroom habits and what I can do to try to make some progress towards these larger challenges. And so my practice is, the way I see it, is that I either have to challenge the status quo, I have to challenge the production of these social inequities, or I am going to be conforming or complicit with the inequitable outcomes. So I think three things that I've picked up on after looking at the data is that there was, I think, in my own practice, a lack of attention to the issues students are facing. So I've tried to bring that out more in my conversations with them and in the materials I produce for the classes. I also have made a much larger focus on intersectional analysis, so race, gender, and class being in concert as opposed to being separated out, and really trying to do more and more with students to, for both of us to understand that process better. And really just going back pretty consistently to just understanding the difficulty of self-examining unconscious bias. And so that is really a process that is better done in my experience with other people and really pulling out and talking about what these biases are, and in hopefully that we can start to have conversations about what we can do about it. I then really tried to think about the existing narrative that we have at Kingsborough, especially since the ATD, the Achieving the Dream relaunch in 2016, to understand why these gaps matter and how they're affecting especially retention and graduation and transfer rates, and to really go back consistently to the loss momentum framework that has been shared by academic affairs at a variety of meetings, and to try to wrap my head around how is this really playing itself out in my own class experience, as well as in the process of what students might be going through and the challenges they might have. So the narrative that we kind of have focused on is the differential between black and white student outcomes, and there are lots of different ways that DEI data can be broken down, but this is the one that has been adopted by a project that I'm involved in, the Race and Equity Leadership Academy, and so I just want to try to also put that into mind to understand that the differential is not consistent across the college, and so students might be having more trouble in particular areas or disciplines. And so I really want to be mindful of that in my own class to see what can I do to help out students in areas they might be struggling. And I won't highlight specific courses, but I will try to integrate some examples and explanations in my class that might help them in other areas of the college. Now, I also have been a part of this kind of critical consciousness work, and so I want to be aware of a race-conscious mindset in a positive sense that is really focusing on not what students are not able to do, but what can I do, and that starts to help me better examine my own blind spots and the obstacles I might be putting into my class experience that are particularly onerous for students who are different than me. As a white male of privilege, it's hard for me to fully appreciate and understand what other people are going through on a day-to-day level, which they're then experiencing in my class as well. And so I try to do lots of interventions and feedback where if I see from the data that I'm having outcomes that aren't meeting my expectations, that I can reach out to individuals and help better understand what are the challenges that they're facing. And that helps me understand that the different outcomes are real, that students are definitely not experiencing the class and college environment the same way, but that the labels might be too fictitious, that what we kind of create for ourselves and what we kind of are used to hearing or how we've been trained and how we're describing people or these outcomes, they're useful, but they might not be fully representational of the students in our classroom. So I want to hear back from them as well as how do they define themselves? What are the expectations that they have? What are the kind of success metrics that they have in mind? And to try not to let the data make all the decisions for me, but to let the students really speak for themselves. So my first reactions after looking at data from the fall of 2018 to the spring of 21 is probably not surprising to most people that there was a general decline during the pandemic, but that men saw the sharpest decline during the pandemic in my classes, and African American and Latino were hit the hardest, that they had the largest downward kind of trends. On the other hand, Black women saw the largest increase as my teaching changed to the pandemic. So those were kind of surprises to me, even though probably they are less surprising as I think about the changes that I made and how that might have reflected the student experience. I also made some pretty significant changes to the course material in 2017 and 2018, which I can see had an effect on outcomes among Black students. And so some purposeful interventions that I had made, I can now see were actually working according to the numbers. I I think the other issue is that I felt, as probably many of us felt during the pandemic, that things weren't going as well, but the data really gives me a concrete picture of exactly where the problems were occurring as far as the student population is concerned. I think the intention of looking at section level data is to help faculty really take a deeper dive. And so this really did get some questions spurring for me. I very much want to know, what practices did I change each semester? I know on kind of the almost subconscious level, or just reflecting at the end of each semester, I know I jot down things that I want to change for the next semester, but I haven't had a chance, or I haven't been given a good reason to really dive down deep and find out, okay, what are the precise things that I changed from semester to semester, and then compare that to the data so I have a better sense of what's working and what's not beyond just my individual perception. I also really want to be mindful of the content that I changed as I was going through this process, and really thinking about what that content says about the subject matter, the discipline itself, and what kind of relationship that has with kind of the textbook or the more traditional approaches of teaching that material, and to really interrogate and think deeply about why those changes matter, not just to our student population, but also to the discipline itself. I also want to think about, what is the communication I had with students? What did they say over email as I was engaging with them? What did they say face-to-face over Zoom? I have to look at all my handwritten notes and think about what were the things that they were concerned about. And then I designed a number of surveys to get student feedback about the process, about what they were going through, and about the content. And I'd like to dive down deeper into their responses on those surveys. And then I think finally, as we've kind of started to work more and more with Starfish, what have I learned from that experience? What worked, what didn't, and what changes am I going to make in the future as far as trying to create enrichment opportunities and interventions for the equity outcomes? So then I kind of put this in this big kind of perspective of this, what would an ideal situation would be. So this is kind of this image on the top of, we'd have the equity outcomes broken down by student in real time, and I could really be looking at the, down to the assignment level, down to participation, to attendance, and really have a much clearer sense of how things are happening in real time. That's ideal, and in a perfect world, that's the kind of information we'd have. But I want to compare that to where I'm at now. And so what I'm able to do is I have information that I've gathered from students, but I can't really break that down into race and ethnicity or gender in real time, in the moment. So I have to kind of just really keep this in mind as I'm collecting data, and then I want to compare assignment completion, attendance, etc., to the larger trends. And so I want to move away from individual cases, which is a methodology that I applied before getting access to the data, where I take 4 students and kind of keep track of them throughout the semester, check in with them, and I purposely pick students who are different than me, and those serve kind of as representatives. I want to move away from that individual case study approach to looking for larger patterns, which are groups across semesters, to see how larger numbers of students are responding to the activities and the content. And I think this can be useful to try to start to imagine just-in-time intervention enrichment that can then pair well with what I've been able to communicate with advisors through Starfish, and we can kind of take this all-hands-on-deck approach. So then there's the changes that I'm making as a part of this process. So one kind of substantial change I think that had the largest impact was I changed the focus of the course to be an inquiry, a research inquiry for students to focus and understand the course through their lived injustices, instead of the ideal abstraction of justice found in a common syllabus or a textbook, which can be very difficult for students to really grasp, as well as it's a fiction, right? It's not based in reality. It's this kind of what if the world was this way? And so by bringing the course closer to how they are experiencing life, it allows for a better dialogue among students and with myself to really interrogate, what do these concepts that we're trying to learn about really mean as they're going through life and they're going through the course. And then I broaden the injustice and analytical framework to also include culture and intersectionality. So moving beyond the black-white differential and really enriching the concept of diversity to fully embrace the different perspectives that people are bringing into the classroom. And this can be challenging at first because it's a lot more information that we're covering. We're covering way more information in the course now than we were doing the textbook approach. But it's also more enriching. It's more fun. We get lots more perspectives. There's more participation, more feedback, more dialogue, which really increases the enjoyment for everyone. I also used a Center for Urban Education syllabus tool that was provided from ATD to take a look at my syllabus and try to make some changes that might be better for students and really to start making sure I'm communicating clearly with them and that I'm doing it in a positive way, but also that I'm using inclusive examples of people in the field, and in this case in law and constitutional law in particular, that really mirror and represent the students. So I try to have pictures and references and scholarly citations to people that are really doing research in race, class, and gender from representations of our student population. I also participated in the Linguistic Justice FIG at our college, where I've been able to think a lot deeper with other colleagues about changes I can make to my material and really to my mindset to help me go deeper into really not just understanding interventions that I can make in the classroom experience, but also enrichment activities where students will feel more welcome and more included in the process of education and really just understanding that they have a good place to be at Kingsborough in our classroom. And then I try to constantly be in dialogue with students, both current students and alum, and to talk to them directly about what it is I'm trying to do, what the college is trying to do regarding our equity campaign, and really to get lots of ideas and feedback from students on what they think would be most productive. And then there's a couple surveys that I've collected over the years now, and I provide a couple of examples here. And just trying to get a sense is that if students are having a so-so or not very good experience at Kingsborough, I really want to try to find more about what can we do to make that process better. From the survey responses I've gotten, they tend to be one or two situations that could be remedied or could just be given a larger context with some dialogue. So just really having dialogue with students about how things are going really changes their outlook on what they think they're able to do. And then I think this represents how I feel that we're doing at Kingsborough is that, are we really providing activities, assignments, and content that value our students' culture? I think we're doing so, right? We're right there in the 3 range, we're right in the middle. And so I think this helps me have a better sense of, okay, this is what I can do reasonably to try to help students have a better experience. And then I started asking students directly what are the course materials that they felt like they were learning the most from, and asked them directly, did they feel that the course was presented in an equitable way? So again, just letting them participate in this process and not being afraid that the answer might be no, or that I might really love a reading and they really don't like it. And so just being able to think about, is there some other reading or is there some other activity I could replace the one that they are really not enjoying or they don't think that it's valuable, with the goal of trying to get to the same level of learning and having that rigor and critical analysis that we're all hoping for, but also being more flexible and understanding that there's lots of knowledge content out there that I could pull from that might be better relatable to them. So then in the meta reflection, I'm really just thinking about, the worst semester I had was fall 2021, and I really want to dive down deeper into these numbers to find out really what was going on. Was it, of course it was partly the pandemic, partly it's the economy, But also, what did I do that semester that was different than others that might have been barriers? What have been things that might have been more difficult for students to get through given this reality that we're in? Also, what are ways that things that were working in person that I know were working, that my numbers were much better before we went online? And so what were those things I was doing that was connecting with students? And how can I replicate those online, if at all? And then finally, I'm really interested in increasing the positive representations of race, gender, and class in my assignments, so not just the content. I think I've really re-examined the syllabus and tried to change the content in the syllabus to reflect our students. But I also want to think about what assignments can I start to design and co-create with students that will really increase the positive representations. We talk a lot about injustice in my class as a constitutional law class. It kind of is a core concept within the discipline, but that doesn't mean we can't also be talking about positive representations. So finally, I just wanted to kind of throw a slide out here. There's a lot of information. There's a lot going on with equity. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. People are definitely, very passionate about issues that are near and dear to them and their lived experience. And so, there's a lot of resources that people can draw from, and to understand that it's tough work. It's very difficult. It's tiresome, and there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of processes that we have to go through that involve constant self-reflection and require us to have a kind of a strange relationship with the data. That on the one hand, it's not going to speak for itself. It's not going to tell us what to do. But on the other hand, it's kind of this thing that maybe gets us to think about things that we wouldn't otherwise think about, and just to understand that we're kind of hopefully all doing this for the good of our students, that we want our classes to be more enjoyable, that we want the outcomes to be better, and that of course we want the promise of an equal education to be a real thing in the lives of our students. And so these are my reflections on kind of just the things that I'm going through in this ongoing process of data. And I'm looking forward to working with many of you in really going further and deeper into this process.